President Biden defends his candidacy after poor debate showing. Israel engages in serious ceasefire negotiations with Iran's proxies as Netanyahu's coalition shows signs of fracturing. And the far left wins in Britain and France as the rest of Europe is moving right. What are the implications?
Welcome to Inside Israel News, your home for American conservative commentary on world affairs and thorough and unbiased analysis of Israeli news, politics, and current events in the Middle East. Or as the internet trolls say, mouthpiece of the Zionist conspiracy, spokesman for the elders of Zion, highly paid propagandist of the Mossad. Yeah, no. This is Inside Israel News. I'm your host, Isaac Kite.
Welcome back, Insiders. It is I, your gregarious Vulcan, your mad genius, your shadow president, your prophet of things to come. Once again, back with an episode, 20 bonus IQ points just for listening. Hope you're enjoying those extra IQ points. I hope they come in handy. This is episode 122. It has been a harrowing journey with this podcast. I work full time. I have 6 kids, now 7. I have to make the time to record these. And it's amazing to think I've gotten to this many episodes. And obviously, as I've been slowly building, talking originally about Israeli politics and expanding the show to talk about geopolitics, international politics, and all that kind of good stuff, we have had the world events that I'm talking about just explode. It's been interesting times. So you're going to get all the information and the perspective. If you want to know absolutely everything that's going on out there in the world, this is the place to be. So there you are. But in terms of making the podcast, it is, there have been times when it's been really challenging. And sometimes it's just busy and I just can't get an episode made. And sometimes life intervenes. I won't be the first podcaster to say that this episode is a little late because life has intervened. As you guys know, my dear wife, Lady Rachel, has been quite pregnant for some time, and she gave birth back on the 28th. And our new daughter, my second daughter, I have lots of boys, 7 kids, I have 5 boys. 2 daughters. So my younger daughter was born, and she didn't pink up right away. And turns out she has pulmonary hypertension, high blood pressure, difficulty with getting her lungs to work. She was full term, but we had some issues. So she's been in the NICU. And that means that while my dear wife is, near the NICU with her, 2 hours away from us in our little small town America where we don't have a NICU, she's been over there, and I've been playing Mr. Mom for over a week. I don't want to make that sound bad. I've been enjoying it. I make sure the kids are taken care of, and of course, most of the older ones can kind of take care of themselves, but, look after the younger ones. Since I travel so much for work, it has actually been a real blessing to be home and spend time with them, and it's been a good time. So my first thought on that is how much of fatherhood really is just showing up. I hear a lot of people talk about, well, I don't know how to be a good father. Half the battle's just being there, buddy. You just have to show up. But we've had fun with the kids, but it's been a stressful time and it's been difficult. And our little girl, Cecily, is she's doing all right. She's fighting her way through the difficulties, and she had a little infection that gave us a scare as well. But so far, she is healthy and doing well, and now she's starting to eat. And my hope is she'll be home this week, and we can kind of get life back to normal and take care of her. Interesting thing about all this, those listeners who've been listening for a while will remember last year, talking about the abortion debate, I really dove into eugenics, and especially European eugenics. I was talking especially about how there are almost no children with Down syndrome born in Europe. They test the babies before they're born, and those who have any kind of danger warning signs or what have you for Down syndrome, they abort. and this sort of Nazi-esque eugenics that they're doing over there. And I pointed out that, I did some substitute teaching in spec ed classes and some volunteering in spec ed classes in years past. And I've worked with children with Down syndrome, and they are perfectly wonderful people and perfectly capable people. And, there was two little twins I remember working with, and the only difficulty we had with them was that they knew how cute they were and that they could get away with anything. So we had to, be watchful to make sure they didn't get into shenanigans. But otherwise, they were, children like any other. So that was an interesting commentary I made there, talking about, how Down syndrome is, people with Down syndrome are just people, and we should treat them like other people. There's no reason that a person with Down syndrome cannot have average intelligence. There are some health risks that are associated with trisomy 21, but it's just another type of humanity, right? We can also be compassionate, and, do they deserve to die just because their 21st pair has an extra chromosome? So that's what trisomy 21 is. The 21st chromosome, basically, normally in the mixing process, right? You have, the chromosomes meeting up, and you have, the X half from the mother and the X half from the father, all the way down to the 26th pair, which is where, if it's a male child, the Y chromosome will be there. Right. But in this particular case, you have a trisomy, which is, the mothers, usually the mothers, sometimes the fathers, rarely, but in like 9 out of 10 cases, the mother's 2X chromosome, complete chromosome pair is there, and then the father's is added to that, and that causes what we would call Down syndrome. I'm oversimplifying, but I just want to get... So it turns out that Cecily has had her diagnosis confirmed that she has Down syndrome. And so I now, after all of that about ending genocide and, of people with Down syndrome and the horrible practice of eugenics in Europe, now I have my own daughter with Down syndrome. And I'm putting my money where my mouth is, like some people, and I'm going to raise her like a normal child. Obviously we'll take care of any other special needs she has, but, she'll join the family and be one of us. And we won't worry about the rest. So that's just an interesting thing that happened. And I don't know, I thought it was an interesting point that I had made about the eugenics thing in Europe. And now, now I have a daughter with Down syndrome, and, hey, that's life, and that's a good thing. I did think it was a little strange. I mean, I know other people take these things in a different way sometimes. I mean, this is our 7th child. It's not our only child, so I don't know how other people might react in other situations. But a lot of the nurses have been, if your child has Down syndrome, it's okay to cry, it's okay to grieve, and this kind of thing. And I'm sitting here like, my wife and I are looking at each other like, this is the way Hashem intended her to be. this is the way God wanted her to be, and this is what we have. So I'm going to end with a last observation. We look at these things from a certain point of view in the West, like, disorders and dysfunctions and this kind of thing. There are other perspectives out there. In India, people with schizophrenia, right, people who see and hear things that are not perceptible to other people, let's just put it that way, they're not treated like they're mentally ill. The Indians look on those people as they're connected to a higher plane, that the things they're seeing and the voices they're hearing and whatever else is coming from somewhere else, right? That they're on a higher spiritual plane. And so those people are, people feed them and take care of them, and they live a different kind of life worth, being cared for by the community. So you could look at that as that's a way for the community to take care of people who may not be able to take care of themselves, but also just a different perspective on things. Maybe, we need all kinds of people, including people who see and hear things that aren't there, including people with Down syndrome, in order to have a fully functional society. It's not for us to say. And in this case, it's not for me to question Hashem's motives. He will do what he does, and I'm just here for the ride. So I take it in stride. But, I love my little princess, and I'm going to take care of her like any of my other children. And I just looking forward to her being healthy enough to come home. So that has been the reason for the delay up to this particular juncture. Now I can kind of get back to the regular episode. So many things have been happening in the world. We've had elections, we've had debates, we've had there's a lot of stuff to talk about. Before that, I'm going to tell a little bit about books and reading real quick here in the entertainment section briefly. And then analysis of all of the crazy things that are going on in the world as they unfold. So go from there. There are there's a lot of wokeness out there, my friends, and it's gotten to be a lot in all of our entertainment. I mean, basically, anywhere you look, left, right, up or down, there's all kinds of wokeness. You can't watch a movie anymore, it seems, or get any kind of entertainment without running into something ridiculous in the wokosphere, and weird moral, puritanical moralizing from these people on the left. But we need to have a good sense of humor about all this. I wanted to tell you about this book I came across. And it's not a surprise that I came across. It was written by a friend of mine. This book is called Good Intentions, written by Bob Zeidman. Bob Zeidman is a buddy of mine. He's been around for a while. There are a bunch of books called Good Intentions. So find the one by Bob Zeidman. Yeah, he's a great storyteller. But he has this great story. I don't read a lot of fiction, but every now and then I need a break from all of this stuff. And he just had fun with this. So we find the perfect woke candidate, right, in some point in the future, and they're going to campaign for president. Right, we've got the ultimate woke candidate going to go out to America and campaign for president, and in the process learns about America and learns that it's not as woke as they thought it was, and not what they thought. And this is an interesting story about what it means to be American, among other things, and that kind of thing. So all the identity politics and all that. So he had a lot of fun with this story. I don't want to give away any of the great plot points, but if I were you, I'd go check it out. It's available as an audiobook on Audible, also available on Amazon. Good Intentions by Bob Zeidman. It's a great story, and it'll give you a break from the monotony of all of the nonsense that's going on out there. I mean, like I said, I don't read a lot of fiction, but when I need a break, I need something that's entertaining and amusing, a really good story. Bob's written some great books. Another one he has that I like is Animal Lab, if you're interested in that. It's kind of an update on George Orwell's Animal Farm. I'm a big Orwell fan because, Orwell, it took I want to say, an ideological, committed communist to point to all of the flaws in communism. Like he understood the wrong-headedness of it better than anyone else, and it's good stuff. So Bob takes that concept of Animal Farm and makes it Animal Lab, bringing it up to date. Anyway, he's got a couple of great books out there, So you just if you're interested in a laugh, if you're looking for also for an update, on that Animal Farm story. Anyway, it's good fun. I'm having it's a good entertainment. So check those out. Good Intentions by Bob Zeidman. Great book. You'll be entertained, and it has a little bit of fun about all the politics around. Maybe like I've told you guys, there's something about Jewish humor. Like if we didn't laugh, we'd scream. We just have to have a good laugh here and there at ourselves, at the world, at everything, because things can get nuts out there, and they are. So let's do that. So check that out, have some fun, and go from that. All right, we had an awesome experience last week. This debate. I don't even know where to start. The strategy that Donald Trump thought through. All these people that talk about Donald Trump like he's some kind of idiot, he's some kind of buffoon, like he just literally everything, he says everything that comes into his mind. and I find that amusing because then we have something like this where there's an incredibly brilliant, well thought through strategy at play. And because they underestimate him, they get just beaten over the head with it. So let's talk a little bit about the strategy before the debate. So first of all, Trump arranged for this debate. It's with CNN. So the anchors are hostile. So Trump thrives when, it's him against the system, right? So that's a good place for him to be in. He has this ability to, go up on the stage. He's up against Biden. He's up against the commentators, So it's Trump against them. He thrives in that environment of everyone against him. Everybody's picking on him. Everybody's trying to beat him up. And he's the one who is thriving. Well, he set that up. And at first it looked like, well, so why would he do this? Because obviously now that, they've got the conviction and all that, Biden's just going to beat him over the head about how he's a convicted felon and all this kind of thing. I was joking with my friends. Let's count how many times we hear the word felon in this debate. But, you could look at it and you'd be like, well, what is Donald thinking here? Right? Now, at the same time, Trump also built up some excitement about who his VP nominee might be. And that was an interesting take on it, too, because he had the debate and then he had a rally that either one of them, he could have announced a VP nominee. So he had this all set up and he went into the debate. And one of two things was going to happen. Either Trump was going to get the narrative he wants. And this is back to this point that Donald Trump is really good at owning the narrative. Right? He understands that there's no such thing as bad press, right? He wants the narrative to be what he wants the narrative to be, right? The narrative that best supports him, that best serves his goals, right? That's his strategy here, to control the narrative. So he has two ways now. One, if Biden has a terrible debate performance, then the next several weeks people will be talking about that. Or if somehow Biden manages a decent debate performance, Trump can make the debate, the narrative after the debate about his VP nominee, right? So either way, he has something to throw the media that forces the media to talk about some new issue, right? And because the media has to talk about these things, right? They're addicted to this, what Rush Limbaugh used to call the drive-by media, right? They come and they shoot everything up and then they disappear. Well, they have to talk about the things that are out there. Even if, they don't like Trump's VP nominee, they're going to have to spend a lot of time talking about it, even to bash that person. And everything they say, the listeners are going to be listening to and might even think, hey, that person actually sounds pretty good. Right? So we've seen this strategy before. So brilliant setup going into it. So Trump had no idea what was going to happen at the debate. I mean, we had a pretty fair notion that Biden was having some mental difficulties and what. But he went into the debate ready to own the narrative for the next little while. Last thing before I go into, the performance itself, I've talked about before how when you look at the polls, the weaknesses of these particular candidates don't matter, right? So Trump's weakness, he's being charged with all these things. So he could be, a convicted felon. They can claim he's a criminal, all these kinds of things. So that's a weakness for Trump. And Biden has the weakness of senility. People who assert, quite reasonably so, that he's not all there. And I pointed out, 40% of the population is going to of the voters are going to vote for Biden anyway. They don't. If he was comatose, if he was half dead, they don't care. They're voting against Trump, and they're going to vote for Biden to vote against Trump. Well, then you flip that over, and it's like you have a committed fan base for Trump. It's somewhere like 43% that are all Trump all the time, and they don't care whether he's convicted, whatever. They're supporting Trump. There are a few people in between to whom it could matter, but for the most part, the weaknesses that would normally destroy a candidate, right, just don't seem to apply. You have a whole bunch of people who want to vote for Biden, a whole bunch of people who want to vote for Trump, and it doesn't seem to matter as much, those kinds of things. Well, they got their 34 felonies against Trump, and yet their talking point, and so they've been bashing Trump over the head about he's a convicted felon. And Trump had, this idea, this debate, he could take Biden's weakness and bash him over the head with it, right? Well, that seems to be the successful outcome of the debate and a brilliant strategic move by Trump. Either way, he controls the narrative, and he still has the VP nominee. So as the narrative of Biden's debate performance wears off, Trump has something to keep the attention on him and on, the narrative that he wants. So again, just brilliant. We're seeing Donald Trump at Donald Trump's best. He's a very brilliant strategist, and that's, I think, how he's been successful in business. So let's talk about the performance. Oh my God. At first, Biden seemed like his usual self. I mean, he's old and he's a little slow here and there, but he he managed to get his points across. He managed to, be coherent a little bit. And then at a certain point, he starts trailing off about, there's entitlements, we beat Medicare. And then he just kind of disappears. And Jake Tapper, the CNN, and people talking about, oh, well, the CNN hosts were protecting Biden. Well, so he sort of ends the thing and moves on to the next segment. But, I don't know that that's so much protecting him. I was embarrassed for him too. Like I felt, you feel bad for the guy. Like none of us, we should not feel a hatred. I mean, yeah, these people have mistreated and abused people on the right. But at this point, the way they're treating Joe Biden is really despicable. Like this poor old man should be retired and at home. They keep these people in the Senate forever. So, I guess theoretically, Strom Thurmond could stay in the Senate until till he was ready to croak. I guess, you could drag Joe Biden through the Senate the same way. But the point is, it was, I don't want to say heartrending, but, this poor guy's up there. Like he's lost his train of thought. He's completely gone. So Tapper moves on to the next thing. And shortly thereafter, again, Biden trails off and he's confused and he doesn't seem to know what he's talking about. We saw it several times in the debate. And Trump was actually pretty good about it. He's making the point like, I don't know what you're saying, Joe, and I don't think you do either. So he wasn't especially mean about it, but he's making the point, right? This is, the legal team, Joe Biden's legal team, tried to argue that he was not fit to stand trial. And then they want to convince us that he's fit to be president. Wow. Now, Biden did have a couple of good points. I credit where credit is due. Biden was sharp on Hamas and on Israel. Unfortunately, it's just talk. And it's easy to talk about, how, we're for Israel and this kind of thing. Then, turn around and be like, we're withholding weapons and trying to imply that somehow Israel isn't keeping up its end on humanitarian aid and this kind of stuff. So it's saying one thing and doing another, granted. But he made a fair point there, and he was sharp on Ukraine, a position that Trump is warming to. Trump's slowly kind of coming around on Ukraine, recognizing some of the challenges going there. It's another section I'll talk about. So, Biden had a couple of strong points on foreign policy before he started kind of losing his train of thought and losing coherence, So we all saw it. If you watched the debate, you saw it. You know what happened there, right? And that showed everyone that, Joe Biden is not the president, right? He's not the one who is running the country. And that's the point I've made several times. If he's not, then who is? And that's a terrifying thought. The fastest way, if there is a path to tyranny in America, right? The fastest way to that path is when our elected leaders are not in charge, right? The day that the president isn't actually running the administration, the day that Congress is powerless to act on behalf of the people or, ignores the will of the people. The day the Supreme Court has no power, that's when, when power is out of the hands of our constitutional institutions, our elected officials, that's when we're in trouble. And that's a terrifying thought. That's the prospect. Here we are. Our president is kind of incoherent and doesn't seem to know what's going on, and clearly is not the person who is running the government, leaving us with the question of who is. And, we have from, Jean-Pierre, he has a team. Really? I mean, Reagan had a team. Trump had a team. You know what I mean? Like there are people who help to run the government. But the decisions, the big choices, have to be made by someone chosen by the people. Someone whose judgment, someone whose agenda is in keeping with what the people want, right? And who is answerable for those decisions to us. What we know for this administration, basically the Obama people have been running the government, and Joe Biden really has nothing to do with it. We've had several times where he says something in an interview, and they cut in, the White House clarified that Joe Biden is not changing policy on Taiwan and this kind of thing. What is the White House? What is the White House? The President of the United States makes policy. What the president says, the words that come out of his mouth are the policy of the United States. When Ronald Reagan stood at the Brandenburg Gate and said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, That was the policy of the United States. Right? Nobody came back and, well, the White House has clarified that, what Mr. Reagan was saying is just, that he wants the Cold War to end. No, Ronald Reagan was the president. His words were policy, right? So, we're in this situation where, the president can say things, and that's not the policy of the United States. Well, if the person we, at least theoretically, elected is not the one making the decisions, then who the heck is? And that's a point that Trump got on there. And, Biden's senility, while it's sad, and, from a compassionate point of view, I feel like they're abusing this poor guy by trying to drag him over the finish line. It's like elder abuse here. At the same time, it exposes this fact that Biden is not competent and that he's not the one who's in charge. And that has led a lot of people to ask that question, right? Well, who is in charge? Oh, Biden has a team. Okay. That's great. Awesome. And you want us to hand the country over to that team of as yet unidentified people. I mean, we know some of the staff members and the people who work in the White House, but the point is, are we voting for them or are we voting for Biden, right? I mean, when you vote for Biden, who are you voting for, right? Who's going to be running the country? And that is a really important thing. And as I talk a lot about European politics here, those things matter, right? I mean, when you vote Labour or vote Conservative in England, you're thinking about, maybe Rishi Sunak is the head of the Conservative Party or Keir Starmer is the head of the Labour Party, but who are the other people in the party? Who are his teammates, team members, right? Who's on his side? Like, who could be the foreign minister, right? Who's going to be the home secretary, right? Who's going to be defense, right? Who are the people who are going to be there with them? Right, which in the case of Keir Starmer, as I'm going to talk about later, is actually kind of scary. But the point is, those things going into it, right? If you elect the Democrats in America, you kind of know who the Democrats are, who their top senators and representatives are, who the leaders of that party are, and the same with the Republican Party. So anyway, what a thing. This debate performance has put the narrative exactly where Donald Trump wants it for the last couple of weeks here. That has been all there is to talk about. And it's amazing, right? And now that narrative is starting to wear off a little bit, then Trump is ready to hit his VP thing. What I think is really interesting here, my friends, and my analysis here as your shadow president, your gregarious Vulcan fascinating, they bashed Trump over the head with his weakness, right? That they could charge him with crimes and convict him of these stupid things, nobody ever gets convicted. Nobody in New York ever gets seriously fined, let alone, $500 million for, overvaluing their real estate or, misappropriating. I mean, these are stupid crimes that they would never prosecute if it were anyone other than Donald Trump, right? We all know that. And they have to come up with convoluted, torturing, the interpretation of the law and all this kind of thing just to charge him with it. So they beat him over the head with that. So he turned right around and beat them over the head with Biden's main weakness. And now all of the independents, all of the people that Trump lost for being a felon, I mentioned there was a little bit of a shift there. Of course, that's countered by other shifts. For example, growing number of African Americans who are voting for Trump. So you have two things there. First of all, Biden's support among African Americans is declining, which could lead to lower voter turnout or for them to vote for other candidates. Not necessarily Trump, but also Trump's support is growing. Right? He's up to polling at around 22% in that community. That's huge, as Trump would say. That's huge. I mean, that's a big shift. But whatever ground Trump lost over the conviction, he has back now. And so you look at the polls, Trump has between a 4 and 6 point lead. So let's just call it a 5-point lead, 4 months before the election. Right now, I have to quote Rush Limbaugh here. There was a time during the Republican primary in, I think it was September of 2015, and he made a point that was really poignant, that at the time Trump had a double-digit lead over his nearest competitor. And Rush was saying, why is it that the narrative is that the Republican primary is still wide open? Because in the past, when the Republican frontrunner has a double-digit lead, they always say the primary's over. Oh, he's right. So if Jeb Bush had a double-digit lead over his opponent in September of 2015, everyone would have been, the primary's over. They've chosen Jeb Bush is going to be the nominee. So why not Trump? Right? When Trump's double digits over? Why don't they say, oh, the primary's over, Trump's going to win, right? It exposes how the media tries to influence elections, right? If Joe Biden had a 5-point lead now, if he were solid, if he winning all the battleground states and big plus right here, if Joe Biden had a 5-point lead going into July, right? Where we are now, the media would be, oh yeah, it's over. Biden's won this. It's gonna be a landslide for Biden. Trump can't win, right? We'd be hearing all that nonsense, and it's ridiculous, but we'd be hearing it. Okay, so I mean, I want to echo that. That's just, and then of course, media always comes up with some negative narrative when they don't like the person, and they're desperately trying to, Trump is demented, and he's full of everything he says is a lie, and whether they think it's a lie or not, or they think they can fact check this or not, the things that Donald Trump said during the debate are widely believed, right? A majority of Americans, depending on which poll you look at, it's a majority or just a slight, plurality slightly below a majority, think that the 2020 election was not on the up and up, one way or another. I mean, we throw this term election fraud. There's a lot more to it. As I mentioned, Molly Hemingway's book on the election goes into a lot of the legal problems, equal protection of the law, curing absentee ballots in this county, but not in that one, and all this kind of thing. But we can wrap all of those legal problems and all of the ballot stuffing and all of this stuff into one big thing and say that the election was fraudulent. It was not up and up. Most Americans, if not a majority, then half of Americans agree with Donald Trump on that election was not on the up and up, right? Well, so they can fact check all that one. Oh, it's definitely, obviously false claims. But if people believe it, how false can it be? Right. And since then, so, I just talked about it the other day, a couple episodes, what is it? More than 2/3 of Americans today don't trust our election system. So, yeah, what we have done nothing in the meantime to correct for it. Well, I mean, we have Speaker Mike Johnson has this great bill, the SAVE Act, which, if enacted, would require proof of ID for voting in federal elections. And that would at least secure our federal elections, right? Help. You'd have to prove your citizenship with an ID in order to vote. But of course, that's not likely to pass the Senate now, is it? Now, honestly, to be fair, if a guy like John Tester in Montana, who's, voted woke one too many times, if he wanted to be reelected, if some of these Democrats who are heavily embattled in, Montana and Ohio and other, these other battleground states where the Senate battle is being fought, if they wanted to be reelected, they could vote for this and try to get it passed. And if that would look good for them and maybe help them show their moderation and that kind of thing, because something like 81% of Americans believe that only citizens should vote, right? It's a no-brainer. So anyway, I think Mike Johnson's bill should pass. Obviously, it doesn't look like it's going to get through the Democrat Senate, and Joe Biden has promised to veto it. The question of why he would veto it is a very interesting question. Well, why would he be okay with non-citizens potentially voting? In any case, so Trump has a 5-point lead. 4 months into the election, or from the election, we're deep in the campaign. It really is too late to replace the candidate. There's been all this talk of, Ted Cruz thinks they'll try to run Michelle Obama. Kamala Harris is trying to get in there. And with the identity politics, you can kind of understand that. But, I mean, the Democrats have boxed themselves into a corner with that because, any candidate who could be potentially more competent, like a governor, say Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer, these candidates are white. Right? You can't replace a black woman. Well, I mean, Kamala Harris is Indian and Jamaican, and Indians and Jamaicans are great people. No, nothing against that. I'm just like, that's not black. Okay. Just like I hate this term white. Like I'm Northern European and I'm a Yid. I'm not white. Okay. This you can't just paint people with a broad brush. Anyway. So I object to their labeling her a black woman. And they say, well, woman of color, which is a really stupid term to begin with. In any case, because the identity politics, they can't replace her. It's either Biden or her. And I think that's why Ted Cruz has been talking about Michelle Obama, because the only way you could get around Kamala Harris is if you can out-identity politics her. Well, what identity politics could you have better than being the wife of the former black president who's, if you disagreed with Obama, you were a racist, right? Okay. But Michelle Obama is not as popular as people think she is. She's not as suave in her speaking style as people think she is. She's not as well-liked. She doesn't go over as well. And the Obamas in general are not very popular. They've lost a lot of ground. Obama lost votes between his first and second election. And what happened when he was termed out? Right, his Democrat successor, who should have been a shoo-in, right? Hillary Clinton should have been a shoo-in, was defeated by Donald Trump. Right? They had everything going for them. And it didn't work. Okay, so here we are. And that has implications for foreign policy, which I will discuss a little later in the international section about the Ukraine situation and all that. But in any case, we got that lead. Some internal Dem polls, just real quick, showing Trump winning somewhere between 312 and 350 electoral votes. So if Democrat internal polling, there's a staffer for Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan saying that now Biden can't win there, So that's kind of where we're at. The inevitability may be setting in for the Democrats, and they're trying to push, this idea that Biden can still win. He's their best shot. If you look at the polls, Trump takes a 10-point lead over Whitmer. He takes a 10-point lead over Newsom. He has, 7 or 8 points over Kamala Harris. This election is a blowout against anyone other than Joe Biden, and that's the power of incumbency, right? And even with all the weaknesses that encumber Joe Biden right now, the economy, all these things, right, that are kind of hanging around his neck, right? You have all these problems that are going on that are his responsibility on his watch. Even with that, there's a power to incumbency. Trump has that, right? If they switch candidates, then Trump is the former president we remember doing a good job back before the COVID crisis, right? When we had good times and a good economy, and Joe Biden is the only incumbent they have. No one else is going to have that advantage. So here we are. These are our candidates for the second time in 4 years. And, we know their strengths and weaknesses. And they tried to bludgeon Trump, and Trump turned around and bludgeoned them right back. And I think they're the ones that are going to stay down. So with that, I am going to put an end to this segment here about American politics, and we will move on to a new segment.
Hello, my name is Mensch-Kight. Welcome to Eamon's Minute, where I tell a cool story from the past. Today, I am going to be talking about the attack of the Dead Men. This happened on August 6th, 1915, during World War I, on the Eastern Front, where Germany was fighting Russia. The German army had besieged the Russian army at Ossowiec Fortress in eastern Poland. The German army fired chlorine and bromine gas at the Russian army. The Russian soldiers, knowing that they would soon die from the gas, decided to die fighting. They charged at the German soldiers. The Russians defeated the Germans and ending the siege. Only one of the Russian soldiers survived. That's Eamon's Minute. Now back to you, Dad.
Visit the Inside Israel News store on Etsy to get your swag and support the show at the same time. You can get the Promised Land shirt or the Now You're Messing with the Son of a Mensch shirt or other interesting swag, phone cases, and such at the store. Go to Etsy, look up Inside Israel News, or you can go to the website, insideisrael.news, and click on the image of the store. Get your swag and show your support for Israel today. And now for the Israeli news. Hope you guys like that news segment, Eamon's Minute. My third son, Eamon, wanted to do some recording and learn to be more professional in how he does his speaking and what have you. So I thought it would be a great educational experience for everyone involved if we went ahead and did a segment. So hope you like that one. And of course, he's 11. So what do 11-year-old boys like to talk about? Fun things from history that are, from military events, what have you. Anyway, it'll be interesting to see how that goes. So, Israeli news. So we have this excitement lately. There's been negotiations between Israel and Hamas for a ceasefire that would involve the release of the remaining hostages and a number of other factors built into that, including disarmament and what have you. This is sort of the peace deal that the Biden administration's been talking about, but Israel is pushing with its Arab allies for a larger, and more complete settlement. In any event, this has been going on, and we had a couple of interesting incidents that have gone on as part of it. So first of all, obviously, there was the trip by David Barnea, who is the Mossad chief, that he flew over to Qatar and spoke with the government there and with negotiators to see if they could set this thing up. And there's also been some chatter back and forth. Yoav Gallant, who's defense minister, has been really pushing for this. And maybe more forcefully than Prime Minister Netanyahu would like. So Bibi actually chided him publicly, saying, "You're not the Prime Minister." So Gallant is really taking a positive lead here. Of course, if Gallant were the prime minister, he would have a much broader coalition potentially and a much better team. Bibi Netanyahu, of course, is the main problem for Israeli politics right now. That there are a lot of parties that just won't work with him. That's why Benny Gantz left the coalition, among other things. So it's probable that if Yoav Gallant was prime minister, they'd have a unity government and Israel could move forward with a bunch of stuff. Anyway, so with that, so there have been the negotiations. Yoav Gallant has pushed it very hard, and it looks like he's going beyond I don't want to say up, over, around Bibi to the extent that he has to. Now, there's been some pushback on this. Ben Gvir and Otzma Yehudit, the Jewish Strength Party, the Israeli far right, they are opposed to the ceasefire deal. They don't want negotiations. They don't support it. And Ben Gvir wants a greater role in how the war is fought. Like he wants a bigger role in the planning and to be more involved in the process. All of which would be disastrous. Absolutely and utterly disastrous. Because the fact is, the Israeli far right is a really big negative in public relations. I mean, here I am, I'm out here doing the public relations battle for Israel all the time, trying to disprove the false narratives and clarify and make sure that people know what's going on and all that kind of stuff. And you've got all these lies and all this nonsense out there. But the problem is when you get people like, Ben Gvir out there who are known for being far right and this kind of thing, it makes it harder to battle for Israel. It makes it harder to support. I support Israel, but it makes it harder to make that argument. So this is what we're up against, and he's not someone who would be competent to have those leadership roles anyway. So that's problematic. Then there's another issue with the coalition too. So in the last election, as you know, because if you go back and listen to those episodes, not that far back, at the end of 2022, at the elections, then the right-wing government that won, the right-wing parties that won a narrow majority in parliament. As I mentioned, the Knesset, Israel's parliament, they're selected by proportional representation, so people vote for parties. Parties get seats based on their percentage of the vote. You have to get, 3.5% in order to clear the threshold and be able to have seats in parliament. But once you have 3.5% or more, you get seats in parliament. Anyway, so people vote. So these parties won. Bibi Netanyahu and his Likud party the largest party in the Knesset. They won a big block. The religious parties that represent the Haredi, or what people say ultra-Orthodox, the very Orthodox Jews, they gained a big block. And of course, there were these far-right parties in the religious Zionist bloc, which included among them Otzma Yehudit. So, religious Zionists are several parties, one of which is Jewish strength. So that's Israel's far right. I'm using the term far right not pejoratively like the left does and the media does and that kind of thing. I'm using it to describe positions because these people are considerably farther to the right than parties like Likud, which is, center right, and the religious parties, which are religious right. Okay, so very, very different set of political parties here. And they have a lot of views and interests that are deeply out of touch with mainstream Israeli society. So they are kind of out there. Right. Now, that said, they do represent communities in Israel, like any political party does, certain constituencies that feel underrepresented, like the residents of Judea and Samaria, like people who have been tired of, endless peace negotiations and, construction freezes and this kind of stuff that do nothing to benefit Israel. And meanwhile, we keep, there's rocket attacks on October 7th and all this kind of thing that keep happening. Right? They want to take a tougher line. And to a certain degree, a tougher line is called for, as I've talked about before. But Ben-Gvir being involved with running Gaza would be a PR nightmare for Israel, and it would be a bad thing. So Bibi is not going to let that happen. I can tell you that right now. But that means that Ben-Gvir then is agitating against the coalition. Now, another sort of monkey wrench that's been thrown into the coalition right now is the Supreme Court deciding against the ultra-Orthodox and their exception from national service. So I've talked about this issue before a few times, and it's kind of a complicated one that goes back to Israel's founding, and it's not one that is well understood by a lot of people outside of Israel. The Orthodox Jews in Israel are people who came from the shtetl in Eastern Europe, most of them. And so to a certain degree, and I feel this is unfortunate, they've brought the shtetl with them. In the shtetl, a lot of people studied Torah all the time. The men didn't work very much. The agricultural season allowed them to spend a lot of time studying and not working. So when they got to Israel, they wanted a certain number of men to be able to study religion full time. Well, Ben-Gurion was the founding prime minister, thought, hey, it's not a big deal for like 100 guys to stay home and to study and what have you, and then the rest go and work and do their thing, right? Over the years, that number has grown. They are exempted from national service, so they don't have to serve in the military, and the conscription, the draft, if you want to call it that most of Israeli citizens have to do. The Jewish ones, certainly. The Muslims are exempt from the draft, but many choose to volunteer anyway, especially the Bedouins and the Druze. Anyway, this has created this issue because now you have hundreds of thousands of men who are chronically unemployed, who don't work. Their wives are taking all these welfare benefits, and they're raising like 10 kids while their husbands are studying, 14, 16 hours a day in yeshiva, in religious schools. Now what I find amusing about this, if you study Judaism, it's like, the Rambam, by far one of the greatest religious scholars of modern times in Judaism since the Middle Ages, was a doctor. Like he worked full time as a doctor and did his writing and his studying in his own time. On his own time. Rashi, also a great commentator in Jewish thought, was a shoemaker, right? A cobbler. He worked on shoes and did, that he made a living, and then he studied and wrote on his free time. So this idea that you study religion full time, I mean, kind of like there's seminary here for Christians in America. Like you could have someone who goes and studies religion in the sense that they're going to lead a congregation or they're going to do religious studies or what have you. There is room for a certain number of people, 100, 200, 1,000 maybe, to be engaged in full-time religious studies and work and that kind of thing. We can all donate to universities and to private nonprofits and what have you that do studying and printing work and all this kind of thing. That's all kind of there, right? You can do all this stuff. But you can't have a huge chunk of your society busy, studying religion and refusing to work. and refusing to serve in the military. So this is a big issue in Israel. And because the ultra-Orthodox parties, the Haredi parties, have been kingmakers in a lot of coalitions, they get a lot of the things they want, even though the Israeli public overwhelmingly oppose all of these things. They want them to serve in the military. They want them to work like everybody else does. And what they do with their free time is their business. Right? Now, I will also flip that over, as I've talked about before. Unfortunately, in secular Israeli society, there is some prejudice against the Orthodox. So you don't see a lot of people being hired, to work professionally in Tel Aviv and what have you, who dress like the Orthodox do, right? In black coats and their streamels and their locks and this kind of thing. Or there's a little bit of prejudice against them there. So I think that should be attacked, and they should be able to integrate into the workforce nominally like other Israelis, and the prejudices against them should not be legal. But at the same time, they should serve in the draft, join the military, work, and support their families, right? And it's very un-Jewish. Like, read the Torah. It's like, Adam, you're going to go out and you're gonna struggle and you're gonna grow at work, and it's constantly telling you 6 days you will do your work. And then on the seventh you rest. That means 6 days you're working, right? You're working in your fields, or you're working on shoes, or being a doctor, right? So these kinds of things. Anyway, it's a big issue in Israel. Lots of people have very passionate positions on it in different directions, but it is a thing. Well, the Supreme Court recently struck down laws exempting the Haredi from the draft, and that's requiring more of them to serve, and some of their welfare benefits the Supreme Court has struck down in the past. And the government has just kind of continued these things kind of unquestionable legal ground up to this point. So Shas, which is one of the leading Orthodox parties, the Sephardic Orthodox, representing the Spanish tradition of Judaism, mostly Middle Eastern and Turkic Jews, and the Ashkenazic tradition is the European, mostly German, Polish, Russian Jews. Anyway, these so two political parties, or United Torah Judaism represents the Ashkenaz. Anyway, Shas has been going at it with Ben-Gvir, because Ben-Gvir is not willing to support an amendment to try to override the Supreme Court's decision on the draft, and that's creating tension between those two parties. Now, Shas has decided that they're going to continue to support the government, because obviously they know that a government led by Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid, they are very much against the interests of the Haredi, and they are not going to be a favorable thing. They would require the Haredi to serve and work and do all those things. So, they don't want the opposition to come to power, right? But Ben-Gvir is still agitating over the peace negotiations, and he's agitating for a bigger role in the military operations in Gaza and all of these kinds of things, getting a bit of a big head, and threatening the coalition. So you've got a couple of different things here. Could the Orthodox bolt the coalition because it's not, they're not able to get the things that they want? Probably not, because they know that this is the best deal they're going to get, and that if elections are held, they will probably lead to the election of a government that would not be favorable to them. Ben-Gvir is against the ceasefire negotiations and says he'd leave the coalition if a ceasefire deal is reached. And meanwhile, he's agitating against Shas and this kind of thing. So there are some fractures here. There's a little friction, and we'll see how this goes. As I've said before, as long as the conflict is on, there are not likely to be elections, right? But these show signs that even among the parties on the right, all is not well. So there are certain signs, a little bit of seismic tension here, that there may be some shift in the political situation, or change in the political situation in the near future. Meanwhile, with the ceasefire negotiations, there's been a bit of a turn. I've been talking a lot about how this conflict in Gaza is going to wheel around to the north. Hezbollah has continued to agitate against Israel, to provoke. They continue to fire rockets and drones and anti-tank missiles and mortars and all kinds of things into Israel. Tens of thousands of Israelis have had to evacuate their homes in the north and take shelter farther south. And Israel's consuming a lot of energy and resources combating Hezbollah in the north. And the IDF has, on a couple of occasions, said that they've approved operations to go into Lebanon and clear Hezbollah out of southern Lebanon. But it hasn't happened yet. Lebanon is escalating and then de-escalating and escalating and de-escalating. They know that a major conflict, even though they would be a much more serious threat than Hamas was, they could do more damage to the Israelis. But if Israel goes back into Lebanon, Hezbollah will be destroyed. They will be in really bad shape when it's over. So to a certain degree, they know that they need to play along. And there's also, Iran has its own problems. And I think the Iranians are trying to play nice for a little while to try to get their nuclear weapons. If they can get weapons like that, then the regime will be safe. So they're playing a little more of a long game now and trying to maybe to let things simmer down a bit. I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things like, what does a terrorist regime want to do? Right? It's hard to measure. They've got their own internal problems right now after the death of Raisi and the new elections and the moderate one. And it's one of these things, he's a moderate terrorist. He only supports terrorism on alternate Mondays. It doesn't matter because the president of Iran is a largely irrelevant office. It's the Fouki, the supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei. He's the guy who runs the government, right? So that's the truth of it. But anyway, Hezbollah has said if a ceasefire is negotiated with Hamas that they would abide by it, for what that's worth. How much do you trust terrorists? So it looks like there is a potential now that that Hamas has taken a lot of damage, that Hezbollah has taken a lot of damage, that they realize that open conflict with Israel is a bad idea, and they may be ready to back down, right? If that's the case, them backing down without really causing any major damage, October 7th by Hamas, but Hezbollah, it would be a strategic loss for them unless in some larger grand scheme of things, Iran comes out better for all of it because, of course, these are Iranian proxies. The whole point here is for them to make Iran more powerful, support Iran's interests. So anyway, we'll see what happens here. It's entirely possible that they will back down because they need to lick their wounds, because they're in pretty bad shape. They've had the snot kicked out of them in Gaza, and Hezbollah has taken some serious licks from Israeli bombing and counterstrikes, right? The Israeli response to Hezbollah's provocations. So we will see what happens. On the one hand, that would be a positive because it would allow a calm to return and peace and all this kind of thing. On the other hand, we do need to take that minute to think about it. Morally, we need to defeat our enemies. At the same time, Israel is consuming a lot of resources and Israel needs a chance to get its economy going again. So, a pause in the fighting might be a good thing for us too. So we'll see how it goes. If a deal comes together, will Ben-Gvir bolt the coalition? Right? Would he bring on new elections? It could happen. And in theory, at that point, if the ceasefire holds, because, of course, ceasefire doesn't mean much to these terrorists. A lot of times they'll do a ceasefire and then they'll fire more rockets. Ceasefire doesn't really mean ceasefire to them. It just means maybe toning it down a little. They're only going to support terrorism on alternate Mondays. These terrorists, always with the negative waves. There's nothing but negativity. It's a question of, are we gonna be firing more rockets today or fewer? Are we gonna be, burning civilians alive today, or are we just, sitting here cooling our heels waiting for tomorrow? Will we get attacked, this week, next month, right? But in any case, it's a question of whether Israel wants to de-escalate for the time being. So that's the situation. So we'll see if this ceasefire deal comes together, and if it does, what kind of terms are there. And God, if we could get our hostages back. Just to take a minute, Naama Levy is still a hostage. Ariel and Kfir Bibas are still hostages. Kfir Bibas was not even 1 year old when he was taken. It's sickening. He had his first birthday as a hostage, right? We need these hostages returned, all of them, right? So that we have our people back. We value life. Life is sacred to us. They value death and destruction, So there we are. Anyway, as I close this segment, one last funny thing. There's this neo-Nazi fruitcake out there, goes on X, named Jake Shields. Don't look him up. He's a nutter. he should just change his account name to Norman Nutter. Says he's a communist, MAGA, whatever, and he's a white supremacist. And anyway, he's a fruitcake of global and epic proportions. But we have this meme going around from Mr. Fafo. I've talked about him on here before. Al-Fafawari, we call him. So, he's a guy that, one day he's a radiologist, and the next day he's a journalist, and the next day, he's doing these things. There's a video of him, celebrating rockets being fired into Israel, and then, in the next video he's crying, "Oh God, people have been killed, it's terrible, the Israelis are murdering us." And, the next day, he's wrapped up in a death shroud as a casualty of war, and looking at his, looking at his phone, those dead bodies that comically kind of get up and move around. They're really good at this. So you get a single shot, a picture, 7 bodies in a row, and our martyrs, they're killed, cut down in their prime, and then they get up and start looking at their phone and having a little snack and these kinds of things, right? So anyway, Pallywood, right? Anyway, there's this meme going around as a joke. It has this picture of Fafawari in his press outfit. Okay. It jokes. It's like, in another turn of events, terrible news. Mr. Fafawari, a Gaza journalist, has been killed for the 7th time. It's this joke we have going around the internet about this guy who, gets whacked. He claims to have been killed several times. And like I said, one day he's a radiologist, and, the next day he's a martyr, wrapped in a death shroud. And the next day he's a journalist. And on alternate Mondays, he's serving food to people, just this guy. And he's very talented. He's very multi-talented. Fascinating. So anyway, yeah, so this meme's going around about him, and this guy, Jake Shields, shared this and said R.I.P. So apparently he didn't read the meme, but it's like this guy supposedly he was sad that this guy had been killed. And we're like, dude, it's a joke. But we've been pointing out, it goes back to that point that anti-Semites, people who hate Jews, are really stupid. Like, first of all, they have to lie about everything because, they can't tell the truth. If they told the truth, then they're like, Jews are just like other people. I live, I breathe, I bleed. Tickle us, do we not laugh? Prick us, shall we not bleed? Wrong us, shall we not revenge? Like Shylock, I'm just the guy here, right? I'm not looking for anybody's pound of flesh, for sure. But, like, we're just people, we fathers and mothers, sons and daughters, aunts and uncles. Like we're people who live. A lot of your Nobel Prizes and your leading physicists and doctors and what have you will find happen to be in a lot of cases are Jews. We're pretty smart people, okay, but we're people, right? There's no vast Jewish conspiracy, this kind of thing. All this nonsense about, we're sniveling, conniving trolls. But so, they have to lie. They have to come up with the most inane things. We're training dogs to rape prisoners. Wow. There's just the stupid stuff. Blood matzah and secret space lasers. And this was just another example. This guy took a joke meme about, Mr. Fafo, who effed around and found out. That's our joke about him. He's Mr. Find Out. Being supposedly killed for the 7th time, which is a bad joke about, him and his usual Pallywood thing, and he shares it as R.I.P. Anti-Semites, these neo-Nazis, these Norman Nutters, they're not very bright. He does not get his 20 bonus IQ points. He would gain 20 IQ points just by letting go of the anti-Semitism. I just don't, I don't understand why you would embarrass yourself that way, right? Why do you go out and make a fool of yourself like this guy does? What is it with these people? Anyway, I don't get it. Anyhow, when I get back from the break, I will talk about European news, lots of interesting things going on the continent across the pond, and we'll see what's going on with Britain and France in their elections. If you're interested in history and life skills, go check out the Mensch-Kight Show on Spotify and on Apple. Another podcast that I've created. This one a little bit more miscellaneous, talks about different life topics, history, talk about Guadalcanal, and also the birth of liberty, the process by which liberty became the dominant ideology in Anglo-American society, and how Western civilization has generally been more individualist and how it has developed these theories. So if you're interested, go check out the Mensch-Kight Show. On to the international news and all the excitement going on in the world today. Lots of fun. Man, so many fun things. Election analysis, always one of my favorite things to do. Before that, a little bit about World War III by proxy. I've been talking about World War III by proxy and a lot of things going on in the conflict and just, wow, just so much. So, we have a lot to talk about here. Real quick, we've got this sort of specious peace plan that Donald Trump has put out there vis-a-vis Ukraine, right? World War III by proxy, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, the axis of chaos against the Western allies, and Iran's proxies, this kind of thing, right? You've got the hottest point in that, obviously, Israel is another battlefront, and China agitating against the Philippines and Taiwan and Vietnam and everybody else in Southeast Asia on the other front. But Ukraine is the hottest one. This is the biggest war. This is the biggest conflict. And Donald Trump's approach to it has been to say that he would put an end to the war right away. Like, he just wants the war to end, which has led a lot of people to speculate that, he'd be willing to let Russia keep the territory that they've conquered in Ukraine and all this kind of thing. None of which we know for sure. The reality of Donald Trump is what Donald Trump is planning is often only in Donald Trump's mind. He's a very strategic mind. He has a very long-term agenda. He looks at things and he sees things in the long term. You hear all these people talking about, it depends on who's charmed him today. He sees things in a kind of a longer term perspective. But in any case, he has whatever agenda he has, whatever strategic goal he is attempting to achieve. We can only know what he says because the rest is in his head. Like, he isn't going to tell people what's going on there. And so he's told alternating stories. Like, he told Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, that aid to Ukraine would end when Donald Trump comes to office. He's talked about Zelensky being a great salesman and this kind of thing, that Zelensky is able to get all this great aid and what have you, which, honestly, if Zelensky's a great salesman and is able to advocate for his people who are fighting a war for their survival, being, suffering mass murder, the rape of women and children, the mass murder of people. The Russians dropped a Kinzhal missile on a hospital. They fired missiles into Kharkiv. They hit a children's hospital. There are horrible pictures of the children, bloodied and injured, being, having been evacuated. The indiscriminate bombing of civilians is widely considered a war crime today. Widely, as in universally, right? That's Russia for you. That's how the Russians fight war. And I could have told you, the rape, the violence, the torture. If you want to know, go look up Berdyansk. Go look up Izium. There are mass graves. The pictures are not pleasant. In Berdyansk, when they liberated it, there were bodies all over the streets. There were people who had their hands tied behind their back that were, had been shot execution style. If your hands are tied behind your back and you're laying on the ground, you weren't running away, you weren't hurting anybody, you weren't doing anything, you were executed. That's pretty, obvious signs of malfeasance right there. Anyway, so this is how Russia fights. Now, on the one hand, yes, getting this war to its conclusion would be a good thing. On the other, if Ukraine doesn't win, Russia's just going to try again in 10 years. Right? They'll wait for another opportune moment to invade again in the future. They'll destabilize Ukrainian politics. They'll do anything they can do. Anything they can imagine, anything they can manage, they will try again in the future. So how do we put a stop to this? right? How do we end this war? Well, a just and simple way to end the war would be for Russia to accept defeat. But, Vladimir Putin has bet the farm. He's bet the whole country. He's wagered Russia on this war, and he's trying to fight it. Another way we could do it is, give Ukraine whatever they need to win. Like they should have had F-16s before their counteroffensive in 2022, right? They shouldn't have had to wait until this time. Now that their F-16s are finally engaging in combat operations against Russia. I mean, this is ridiculous. They should have had they should have the Taurus missiles. They should have had Storm Shadow earlier. They should have had ATACMS earlier, Patriot missile defense systems. I mean, they should have had all this stuff right away. I said as much back in 2022, because in the summer of 2022, I, your shadow president, told you that if I were president, I would call up Vladimir Putin. I'd say, look, you withdraw from all Ukrainian territory, including the Crimea, and end the war. Or I'm going to start escalating. Because in the United States, we have a lot of tanks sitting around in National Guard lots, and we have a lot of equipment in warehouses. We've got F-16s sitting around. All of that stuff is going to start making its way to Ukraine. And at first in a trickle, and eventually in a flood, until the Russians are overwhelmed, right? And as the pressure grew on Putin, he would have had no choice but to back down. Okay, that's a position of strength, right? What we have now is a position of weakness. So what will happen? What is Donald Trump's peace plan? We don't know. Meanwhile, Zelensky has challenged him on it. He said, well, so what is your plan? Right? You can call me a great salesman, whatever, so what's your plan? Tell us what your great ambition is for ending the war. He's kind of calling the bluff, like Richard Nixon's thing about, I have a plan to end the war in Vietnam. And it turns out he did not have a plan. But they tried Vietnamization, letting the South fight the war, more effectively for itself with fewer U.S. troops, which, was a better strategy for a time. But, I mean, that strategy hadn't worked very well during the Diem regime either. So, that didn't ultimately lead to success. So Nixon ended up having to bomb North Vietnam until finally they accept a peace deal. My point is, Zelensky's just challenging us. So what's your plan here, right? What is your, what are you going to try to do? But Putin has cautiously accepted, I'm for Trump's peace plan, which is nonsense. Vladimir Putin is so full of it, it's not even funny. He doesn't want a peace plan. He would like a chance, some deal where, he gets to keep most of Ukraine and make it look like he's won some kind of victory so that he can rebuild Russia's military and come back in 10 years and try again. Right. Joseph Stalin, I keep making that mistake. I just, every time I think of Vladimir Putin, Stalin's name just comes in mind. How does it happen like that? So easy to confuse these two. It's hard to keep them separated in my mind. You know what I mean? Mass murderers, in trying to establish a Russian empire in Europe. In any case, Putin is saying he supports Trump's peace plan. Nonsense. He doesn't. He just wants a chance to come out of this ahead and maybe, come back in 10 years. It's been a very bad war for him, right? So, in any case, it just wow. All this stuff. On the other hand, I do want to say, in Trump's defense, because I don't like a lot of Trump's positions on this stuff, there is an argument to be made here where you think, look, we got this World War III by proxy. Right now, we do not have the manufacturing capability, the capacity, the industrial might to be the arsenal of democracy, as FDR said so many fateful years ago. When, back in the days when people were, picking on Churchill. Churchill's such a great salesman. Oh, he's this and that. Churchill wasn't a Jew, right? So if he was Jewish, then we'd get all the other stuff about Zelensky. He's money grubbing, sniveling, conniving troll, right? So, of course, Zelensky's a slickster. He's, what is it about Zelensky that makes him such a slickster about money? And, anyway. I'm tired of saying it, my friends. I really am. It's hard. It's hard to speak the truth and just keep speaking the truth, even when, in the face of all this nonsense that's out there. But I'm going to continue to do it. Anyway, we need to build our industrial capacity. It's happening. As a result of free market pressure, now that China is in decline, demographic winter is setting in, manufacturing in Europe is declining, manufacturing in China is declining. Yes, Southeast Asia can pick up some of the slack on cheap, simple goods. India is picking up a little bit too, but India is more interested in domestic economy, in its domestic growth rather than globalization. So if we want finished, high quality finished manufactured products, we have to make them here. And that includes everything from, sophisticated computer chips to war munitions. We are going to have to be the ones to build it. And the much more automated process, because of course America is having demographic winter issues as well. Gen Z is the smallest generation ever, so relative to the previous. So it's one of our smallest generations in recent history. It's the smallest. So they are going to have to pick up the slack of manufacturing. We need time. Okay, in 5 years, our manufacturing industry, especially if Trump wins this election, our manufacturing base will be much bigger. Our military-industrial complex will have recovered and will be ready to, confront these forces. And meanwhile, the Chinese economy is going to tank. Russia is in bad shape. They're not getting in any better shape. Their situation will not improve. So basically, if we can put a stop to this war and put the Chinese on notice and up our industry and take a tough line on everything and keep the situation peaceful for just a few more years, all of these problems may just sort themselves out. Right? Peter Zion out there saying, well, America may not have a competitor for, the next 20 or 30 years. Well, we could live in a world without bad guys. I said as much in 2019. Right? I was on a radio show. You can go to my YouTube channel and listen to me talk about it. I said, we're at a time, because of Donald Trump in 17, 18, and 19, that he had Putin contained and China contained and Iran under thumb, that we could, potentially see a world where these, enemies come to heel and we live in a world without bad guys. Anyway, okay. So what is Trump's plan? We don't know. But if even a ceasefire, he creates, there are some strategic advantages for the U.S. It may not be what's morally right, but it wouldn't be disadvantageous to the United States and our interests. Now, what is morally right is that Russia suffers a total defeat. What is almost certainly going to happen is, Trump will put a deal on the table. Zelensky would be willing to go along with it if it involves Ukraine getting their territory back, but he won't surrender his country. He knows Putin will be back in the future. But if there's the right certain security guarantees for him and that kind of thing, he might be willing to play ball with that up to a certain point. And Putin is not going to be willing to give up the territory that he's conquered, certainly not Crimea, but he will look for an opportunity to get out of this and save face so that he can rebuild and try again in the future. So that could at least buy us time. I don't like this whole kick the can down the road thing. I'm really big on let's just do it now. If I were Donald Trump, your shadow president speaking again, if I were president, I'd just tell Putin, look, get out of Ukraine and we're going to rain fire on you. We're going to send the Ukrainians the equipment that they can use to rain fire on you until, you get out. Now, in the meantime, we really need to get serious. NATO needs to get serious. With the French elections, everybody's distracted, but it's time for no-fly zones. Like NATO forces should go in and, we should be protecting these cities. We should be shooting down, as in NATO, should be shooting down missiles that are flying over Kyiv and Kharkiv and Lviv and all these cities because these, the indiscriminate bombing of civilians is intolerable. We cannot allow the bombing of children's hospitals. Enough is enough. It's time for us to go in and start shooting down this Russian crap. And then, but then NATO would be shooting at Russia. We would be defending our ally from indiscriminate bombing of civilians. Kind of like we did with Israel, protecting Israel from Iran. Okay, that NATO should do. Not shooting at Russian planes, not shooting down anything in, the Russian thing. The Russians aren't going to bring their planes into the no-fly zone anyway. And if they did, we'd shoot them down. Because, the same thing that's what a no-fly zone means. And then, the Putin could whine and whatever. And, he keeps talking about his red lines with nuclear weapons, whatever. He knows if he fires his nukes, the United States will launch a full counterforce retaliation. There will be no military left in Russia. For the most part, there'll be no Russian left. Even because of the location of their population centers, as I've talked about before, a counterforce strike is going to kill, 12 to 18 million Russians. They're already dying of demographic winter. Like, they don't have enough young people in the country, right? Because the country is already aging and dying. If that happens, Russia's finished, right? And I don't even want to talk about the nuclear radiation in the upper atmosphere and the pollution around the world. That would be horrible. But, in the meantime, because we should be prudent. The United States should be building up our missile shield and our air defenses on the East Coast. We have a lot of defenses on the West, deal with North Korea and China, but we need to think about having a broader missile shield to protect us against Russia as well. And that's assuming the Russian missiles even fly. I'm not going to rehash all that. I've talked about that in previous episodes. So anyway, it's a bluff. Putin knows he can't fire the big guns. There's no point in using nuclear weapons in Ukraine because that would unnecessarily risk retaliation from the West, while at the same time bombing a place that he wants to occupy. Right? They want to control Ukraine. They don't want to annihilate Ukraine. On the other hand, firing at the West means a counterforce strike in Russia. Right? That's bad news for Putin. Right? That's the end of Russia. There is no greater Russia if there is no Russia. Fascinating. I find it highly illogical, Captain. Anyway, they don't think about this stuff. Okay, let's move on to elections in Europe. I did some of this stuff. I mean, I feel my IQ lowering from some of the things that the idiocy out there. But again, I'm always a strategic thinker. I think in the long term and the big picture and these kinds of things. And I just don't like a bunch of BS. Don't throw BS at me. That kind of thing. All right. So we've had elections in France. Let's start with France. What a mess. So the European Parliament elections, the National Rally Party, what they call far right, it's the new French right. So I don't know if far right is actually an appropriate term there. So we'll just call them the French right. They had won the elections in the European Parliament in France. And so President Emmanuel Macron called a snap parliamentary election in the hopes that somehow he could salvage some kind of left-wing victory out of all of it. And it's turned out to be a mess and a disaster and a train wreck for France. But then France was a train wreck before the election. It's just, slightly more obviously a train wreck now. And that's too bad because demographically speaking, France has the best situation in Europe. They could be the major European power. But as of now, I'm looking at it and I'm like, I think Poland is the ascendant power in Europe. If I had to wager a guess, the Poles seem to be the only ones who believe in themselves, have strength, and are building up their military strength to counter Russian aggression. So, get ready for Greater Poland, my friends. It's it's gonna be awesome. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth is back. Right? It's one of Eamon's favorite states in history, and you heard Eamon's Minute, so. That's there. Okay. Anyway, French elections. So the National Rally Party did very well in the elections. They more than doubled their parliamentary faction. The Republicans worked with them a little bit with their candidates. There's some strategic voting. I'll talk about that in a second. But the traditional right-wing party, the Gaullists, the Republicans, they are very... they're down, significantly in the number of seats that they have. So, it's been a big, it's been a big mess for the French political system. In the last few years, the traditional parties have completely collapsed. The Socialistes used to be the main left party, and the Gaullists or Republicans used to be the right party. And now the Socialist Party is gone, kind of merged into En Marche, Ensemble, Macron's party. And Republicans are way down in, fourth place now. They're practically forgotten. What has grown in France is populism. The right-wing populism of Marine Le Pen and the National Rally, formerly France Nationale, which was the FN, now it's RN, National Rally, and they've been moderating and coming left a little bit toward the center to become more mainstream party. They work together with Republicans strategically. Again, more on that in a second. So, they're becoming the main right-wing party. So to call them far right now is kind of silly, considering that that's the new French right. Meanwhile, so you get the populist right. Now you have the populist left. You have this guy Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who's Mélenchon is he's a Norman Nutter, which shouldn't surprise you. Basically, he's a populist communist, and he has this notion that France can have this sort of, I don't know, socialist paradise. You know the type, the squad. It's French, but it's kind of the same thing over here, right? So you've got this stuff. So Mélenchon and his his left-wing populists, his communist populists, are they want to change reverse Macron's reforms to the pension program, where people have to retire later. If they do that, they're basically going to bankrupt France's pension program, right? These programs were all designed when there were large numbers of working class people and very few retirees. Remind you of anything? Read Social Security. But today there aren't enough working people paying in to support those programs, and people are living longer. So retirement ages are going to have to rise. But these populists don't accept that, so they run against it. As soon as the election was over, NFP, which is what this populist communist group is, their party, they ran, they were going to, recognize a Palestinian state, and they were going to reverse these things, all this nonsense. So just wow, just psychotic. But in any case, you have 577 seats in the Assemblée Nationale, the French National Assembly. NFP won 180, coming in first. And the Ensemble party, Macron's party, has 159. They came in second. Now, this is where we get to strategic voting. So the Assemblée Nationale is elected very much like our House of Representatives. It's first past the post by geographic districts, just like we are doing here in the U.S. But they have a runoff, right? So you have the top two candidates. So what they've done is they've done a lot of strategic voting in districts where the Ensemble candidate is more likely to win than the NFP candidate. They voted, the NFP people voted Ensemble. In districts where the reverse was true, they voted that way. A little bit of this happened on the right. Republicans and our National Rally worked together a little bit there. But for the most part, the left was able to be successful with this. So even though in terms of vote percentages, right, the National Rally Party received the greatest percentage of votes, right, 37%, to the NFP receiving 28%, and the first round, and then 25% in the second. You had 37% for RN in the second round, but they ended up coming in third. And that's because of strategic voting, of people voting this way or that. And 200 candidates resigned, dropped out of the race so that the left could win. So people talk about that as cheating. Strategic voting isn't cheating. It's a normal part of politics in Europe. But here's the reality. It has created a result in the National Assembly, the Assemblée Nationale, that is not reflective of the voters. If this had been a proportional election, RN would have come in first, and then you'd have had NFP second and Ensemble third, right on their heels, almost, pretty close on their heels. But, they did the election this way. And the Republicans are, they're down in fourth. So, I mean, what did we see here, right? So you had 180 seats for NFP, 159 for Ensemble, Macron's party. You have 142 for RN now. They're third place in the parliamentary elections, even though they came in first in terms of the number of votes. And, there are 39 seats now for Republicans. So they're down quite a bit. But, now basically Macron is forced to hand domestic policy over to some form of coalition between NFP and Ensemble. And I mean, to get Ensemble and NFP to work together, to get NFP on board in this coalition, it's going to require concessions that are just disastrous. Basically, France is just going to die. They're talking, there are people out there talking about a 90% tax rate for the top earners. I mean, wealth taxes, increased public services and welfare. So we'll see what happens, but the kinds of agenda that NFP would demand, the concessions they would demand in order to join the coalition, are the kinds of concessions that are just going to lead France down the path to insolvency. It's just not going to work out. Okay, so there you are. So that's the disastrous result in France. Now, the reality of this is they're going to have elections in 2027 for the presidency and parliament, right? So Emmanuel Macron is still president. He stays president until 2027. When that happens, it is most likely that the top two candidates going to the presidential runoff are going to be the RN candidate, more on that in a second, and Jean-Luc Mélenchon and the NFP, or whoever they put up, but probably Mélenchon. So, it's going to be exactly what I said the last time I talked about French politics, which was that the next election, presidential election, was likely to be between the populist far right and the populist far left. But, the right just isn't as far right anymore, but still, right? It's there. So, once again, your prophet of things to come has spoken and proven mostly correct. So we're on course for my prophecy to be true, to come true. All right. And, quickly, British politics, again, what we expected. The right has basically collapsed. Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives have become very unpopular. The analysis by a lot of other people, basically the Tories, the Conservatives, never really had an answer to Brexit. And as a result, they are, they've been floundering ever since these past few years, since the 2016 referendum. And they've not been able to come up with an effective policy. Britain has not been able to, Brexit was a good idea. I'm pro-Brexit, don't get me wrong. The European Union is sinking. They're, with the demographic problems and what have you, Britain got out at just the right time. But Britain has not taken full advantage of it. Liz Truss tried to implement the kinds of economic reforms that might ultimately lead to greater prosperity, but then she was run out of power because the financial markets panicked. She tried to do too much too quickly. Incremental reforms toward greater free market enterprise would be good for the UK, but they also need trading partners, right? At this point, basically, we're talking about it, like what Britain really needs to do. The UK needs to join NAFTA, the USMCA, right? We need Britain to have that kind of trading relationship with Canada, the US, and Mexico in order for Britain to be able to be prosperous. But, Donald Trump is likely to be president, and even if he's not, Joe Biden's not likely to negotiate a really good deal for them. But Trump is going to drive a hard bargain. He's going to drive a bargain that is good for the US, right? So, you're talking about a very hard deal. In any case, the mess that Britain's in now has been inherited by Labour. Labour has gained 214 seats in Parliament, and there are a total of 650 seats in the House of Commons in the UK. They gained 214 seats. The Conservatives, the Tories, lost 252. They're down at 121. So it's 411 for Labour. That's, just about 2/3, right? 121 for Conservatives. The Lib Dems, the basically the combination of the old Liberal Party and the Social Democrat Party, kind of a Britain's far left party, if you will, they gained 64 seats. They had almost been, wiped out in the last election, but they made a comeback. They are Britain's third party once again. The SNP, Scottish National Party, just completely died. They lost 38 seats. They have 9. That's a good thing for Labour, as we've talked about for a long time. If Labour wants to govern, they need their Scottish seats, and having SNP take seats from them in Scotland means that, there. So with all the stuff that happened with Nicola Sturgeon and all that in Scotland, basically the whole Scottish independence movement is dead. And good riddance to it. So, they've killed it. All right, with that out of the way, just a little comment. The Greens managed to gain 3 seats, so they have 4 total now. And the Reform Party, Nigel Farage, up at 5 seats. They actually have seats in Parliament. Nigel Farage himself was elected to Parliament, which is an interesting thing to see. When the Brexit happened, Nigel Farage was the main advocate for it. And there were a lot of people saying that, Farage should just go be prime minister, basically. David Cameron at the time was not the prime minister for a Britain that was leaving the EU. And, so there was a lot of talk. Of course, they had Theresa May and they had, a number of other prime ministers since then. But there you are. In any case, Labour has won. But now what is interesting about this election is that Reform was the number 2 party in 98 constituencies, right? That means that Reform is big. Reform denied the Conservatives about 100 seats, right? If the Tories can pull their collective heads out of their collective rears and sit down with Nigel Farage and the Reform Party and reach some kind of accommodation, right? If the Tories could actually be conservative and represent conservative values and work with Reform, if they became one party, then Labour is going to get killed in 5 years because the right will be back together and the left will be done. Especially if they can reach out to center right, center left voters, working class voters. So no surprises there. But Britain and France moving left, while the rest of Europe is moving right. It's kind of weird, but maybe these are the last death throes of the traditional left there. So there you go. All right. With that, that's another episode in the can. Hope you guys feel well informed. And this was good. I enjoyed having the Eamon's Minute added. He's been wanting to do some recording, and so now I can teach my boy how to do all the things that I do here too. And hopefully baby Cecily will be home with us soon too. Your prayers and thoughts are appreciated on that. With that, I will say, as always, goodbye, Lahitrot.
Writers of the history, stand with me. Look into my eyes and see. People go away but never say goodbye. Someone stole the moon tonight, took my light. Everything is black and white. Who's the fool who told you boys don't cry? Hours and hours and flowers. Life is no game for the cowards. Why? The time goes by. Every day I'm losing my mind, holding on in this mysterious ride, dancing in the storm. We got nothing to hide. Take me home and leave the world behind. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. Living in a fantasy, ecstasy, everything is meant to be. We shall pass, but love will never die. Hours and hours and flowers. Life is no game for the cowards. Why? The time goes away. Every day I'm losing my mind, holding on in this mysterious ride, dancing in the storm. We got nothing to hide. Take me home and leave the world behind. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. October rain. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. שואפים לישון, אין מקום, אין אותי מיום ליום, כולם ילדים טובים אחד אחד. Bring them back home now.